We got a new toy thing, and you have to put these things in their right color hole.
I did. High five. Because I'm clever. Okay, here we go. Entropics, detection and avoidance. How close are we? This is Madison and 49th. 3 blocks north and a long one east. Can we rest? This air burns to breathe and we've been going fast. Yeah, let's. They crouched together in the shadow of a doorway, 2 wary darknesses in a dim light, watching the traffic that went by. Mostly cabs prowled past, wearing the same hungry look as the one that had wounded Kit. Eat your food. Or a sullen truck might lumber by, or a passenger car looking uneasy and dingy and bitter. None of the cars or trucks had drivers or looked like they wanted them. They ignored the traffic lights, and their engines growled. Nita's eyes burned in the dark air. She rubbed them and glanced down at Kit's leg, bound now with a torn-off piece of her shirt. How is it? Not too bad. It feels stiff. I guess it stopped bleeding. He looked down, felt the makeshift bandage, winced. Yeah, I'm hungry. Nita's stomach turned over. She was too nervous to even consider eating as Kit came up with a ham sandwich and offered her half. You go ahead, she said. She leaned against the hard, cold wall, and on a sudden thought pulled her pen out of her pocket and looked at it. It seemed all right, but as she held it, she could feel a sort of odd tingling in its metal that hadn't been there before. Fred. He hung beside her at eye level, making worried feelings that matched the dimness of his light. Are you sure that light didn't hurt you? Yeah, it's not that. She held out the pen to him. Fred backed away a little, as if afraid he might have swallowed it again. Is this radioactive or anything? Nita said. He drifted close to it, bobbed up and down to look at it from several angles. You mean beta and gamma and those other emissions you have trouble with? No. Nita still felt suspicious about the pen. She dug into her backpack for a piece of scrap paper, laid it on her wizard's manual, clicked the point out, and scribbled on the paper. Then she breathed out, perplexed. Come on, Fred, look at that. He floated down to look. The pen's blue-black ink would normally have been hard to see in that dimness, no matter how white the paper, but the scrawl had a subtle glimmer about it, a luminosity just bright enough to make out. I don't think it's anything harmful to you, Fred said. Are you sure it didn't do that before? Yes! Well, look at it this way. Now you can see what you're writing when it's dark. Surprising you people hadn't come up with something like that already. Nita shook her head, put the paper away, and clipped the pen back in her pocket.
Actually, why hasn't somebody done that yet?
Kit, finishing the first half of his sandwich, looked over at the scribble with interest. Comes of being inside Fred, I guess. With him having his own claudication and all the energy boiling around inside him, you might have expected something like that to happen. Yeah, well, I don't like it. The pen was fine the way it was. Considering where it's been, Kit said, you're lucky to get it back in the same shape instead of crushed into a little lump. He wrapped up the other half of his sandwich and shoved it into his backpack. Should we go? Yeah. They got up, checked their surroundings as usual to make sure that no cabs or cars were anywhere close, and started up Madison again, ducking into doorways or between buildings whenever they saw or heard traffic coming. No people, Kit said, as if trying to work it out. Just things. All dark and ruined. And machines, all twisted. Alive, but they seem to hate everything. And pigeons. Dogs, too, Nita said. Where? Kit looked hurriedly around him. Check the sidewalk and the gutter. They're here. And remember that nest? Nita shrugged uneasily, setting her pack higher. I don't know. Maybe people just can't live here. We're here, Kit said unhappily. And maybe not for long. A sudden grinding sound like tortured metal made them dive for another shadowy doorway close to the corner of Madison and 50th. No traffic was in sight. Nothing showed but the glowering eye of the traffic light and the unchanging "Don't Walk" signs. The grinding sound came again. Metal scraping on concrete somewhere across Madison, down 50th to their left. Kit edged forward a bit in the doorway. What are you? I want to see. He reached around behind him, taking the antenna in hand. But if that's something that might chase us later, I at least want to look at it. Fred, take a peek for us. Right. Fred sailed ahead of them, keeping low and close to the building walls, his light dimmed to the faintest glimmer. By the lamppost at Madison and 50th he paused, then shot low across the street and down 50th between Madison and 5th, vanishing past the corner. Nita and Kit waited. sweating. From around the corner, Fred radiated feelings of uncertainty and curiosity. These are like the other things that run these streets, but these aren't moving. Maybe they were dangerous once. I don't know about now. Come on, Kit said. He put his head out of the doorway. It's clear. With the utmost caution, they crossed the street and slipped around the corner, flattening to the wall. Here, stores and dingy 4-story brownstones with long flights of railed stairs lined the street. Halfway down the block, jagged and bizarre in the dimness and the feeble yellow glow of a flickering sodium vapor streetlight, was the remains of an accident. One car, a heavy 2-door sedan, lay crumpled against the pole of another nearby streetlight, its right-hand door ripped away and the whole right side of it laid open. A little distance away in the middle of the street lay the car that had hit the sedan, resting on its back and skewed right around so that its front end was pointed at Kit and Nita. It was a sports car of some kind, so dark or brown that it was almost black. Its windshield had been shattered when it overturned, and it had many other dents and scrapes, some quite deep. From its front right wheel well jutted a long, jagged strip of chrome, part of the other car's fender, now wound into the sports car's wheel. I don't get it, Nita said silently. If that dark one hit the other, why isn't its front all smashed in? She broke off as with a terrible metallic groan, the sports car suddenly rocked back and forth like a turtle on its back trying to right itself. Kit sucked in a long breath and didn't move. The car stopped rocking for a moment, then with another scrape of metal started again, rocking more energetically this time. Each time the side-to-side motion became larger. It rocked partway onto one door, then back. Do you need help?
Yeah.
Okay. Each time the side-to-side motion became larger. It rocked partway onto one door, then back the other way and partway onto the other, then back again, and full onto its left-hand door. There it balanced, precarious, for a few long seconds as if getting its breath, and then twitched hard, shuddered all the way over, and fell right side down. The scream that filled the air as the sports car came down on the fender-tangled right wheel was terrible to hear. Instantly it hunched up the fouled wheel, holding it away from the street, crouching on the 3 good wheels and shaking with its effort. Nita thought of an old sculpture she had seen once, a wounded lion favoring one forelimb, weary and in pain, but still dangerous. Very slowly, as if approaching a hurt animal and not wanting to alarm it, Kit stepped away from the building and walked out into the street. Kit! Shh, he said silently. Don't freak it. Are you out of your... Shh! The sports car watched Kit come, not moving. Now that it was right side up, Nita could get a better idea of its shape. It was actually rather beautiful in its deadly-looking way. Sleekly swept back and slung low to the ground. Its curves were battered in places, its once shining hide was scored and dull. It stared at Kit from Hunter's eyes, headlights wide with pain, and breathed shallowly, waiting. Lotus Esprit, Kit said to Nita, not taking his eyes off the car, matching it stare for stare. Nita shook her head anxiously. Does that mean something? I don't know cars. It's a racer, a mean one. What it is here... Look, Nita, there's your answer. Look at the front of it under the headlights. He kept moving forward, his hands out in front of him. The Lotus held perfectly still, watching. She looked at the low-sloping grill. It's all full of oil or something. It's a predator. These other cars, like that sedan, they must be what it hunts. This time its prey hurt the Lotus before it made its kill, like a tiger getting gored by a bull or something. Oops! Kit, 8 or 10 feet away from the Lotus's grill, took one step too many. It abruptly rolled back away from him a foot or so. Very quietly, its engine stuttered to life and settled into a throaty growl. Callie, hush. Kit, shut up. I won't hurt you, he said in the speech aloud. Let me see to that wheel. The engine growl got louder. The sound of the speech seemed to upset the Lotus. It rolled back another couple of feet, getting close to the curb, and glared at Kit. But the glare seemed to have as much fear as threaten it now. I won't hurt you, Kit repeated, stepping closer, holding out his hands, one of them with the antenna in it. Come on. You know what this is. Let me do something about that wheel. You can't run on it. And if you can't run or hunt, I bet there are other hunters here, aren't there? Or scavengers. I'm sure there are scavengers. Who'll be coming here to clean up this kill? And do you want them to find you here, helpless? The lotus stared at him, shifting a little from side to side, now swaying uncertainly. The growl had not stopped, but it hadn't gotten any louder either. If I were going to hurt you, I would have by now, Kit said, getting closer. The car was 4 feet away, and its headlights were having to look up at Kit now. Just let me do something about that fender stuck in you, then you'll go your way, and I'll go mine. The dark eyes stared at the antenna, then at Kit, and back at the antenna again. The lotus stopped swaying, held very still. Kit was 2 feet away. He reached out with his free hand, very slowly, reached down to touch the scratched fiberglass hide. The engine raced, a sudden startling roar that made Nita stifle a scream and made Kit flinch all over. But he didn't jump away, and neither did the lotus. For a second or two, he and the car stood there just looking at each other. Small, trembling boy, large, trembling predator. Then Kit laid his hand carefully on the brown hide, a gingerly gesture. The car shook all over and stared at him, its engine quieted to an uncertain rumbling.
Can you pause it for a second so I can get Crate?
It's okay, he said. Will you let me take care of it? The lotus muttered deep under its hood. It still stared at Kit with those fearsome eyes, but its expression was mostly perplexed now. So was Kit's. He rubbed the curve of the hurt wheel well in distress. I can't understand why it's mute, he said unhappily. The Edsel wasn't. All it took was a couple of sentences in the speech, and it was talking. It's bound, Nita said, edging out of the shadow of the building she stood against. Can't you feel it, Kit? There's some kind of huge binding spell laid over this whole place to keep it the way it is. She stopped short as the lotus saw her and began to growl again. Relax, Kit said. She's with me. She won't hurt you either. Slowly, the growl dwindled, but the feral headlight eyes stayed on Nita. She gulped and sat down on the curb where she could see up and down the street. Kit, do what you're going to do. If another of those cabs comes along. Right. Fred, give me a hand? No, he said hastily as Fred drifted down beside him and made a light pattern and a sound as if he was going to emit something. Not that kind. Just make some light so I can see what to do down here. Kit knelt beside the right wheel, studying the damage, and Fred floated in close to lend his light to the business, while the lotus watched the process sidelong and suspiciously. Nothing too bad. It's mostly wrapped around the tire. Luckily it didn't get fouled with the axle. Come on, Kit said in the speech, patting the bottom of the tire. Relax it. Loosen up. Move over a little bit. You're forcing the scrap into yourself, holding the wheel up like that. Come on. The lotus moaned softly with fearful care, relaxed the uplifted wheel a bit. That's better. Kit slipped the antenna up under the lotus's wheel well, aiming for some piece of chrome that was out of sight. Fred, can you get in there so I can see? Good. Okay. This may sting a little. Molten light, half seen, sparked under the lotus's fender. It jumped, and an uneven half-circle-shaped piece of chrome fell clanging onto the pavement. Now hunch the wheel up again. A little higher. Kit reached in with both hands and after a moment's tugging and twisting freed the other half of the piece of metal. There, Kit said, satisfied. He tossed the second piece of scrap to the ground. The engine roared again with terrible suddenness, deafening. This time Kit scrambled frantically backwards as the lotus leapt snarling away from him. With a screech of tires, it swept so close past Nita that she fell over backward onto the sidewalk. Its engine screaming, the lotus tore away down 50th toward Madison, flung itself left around the corner in a cloud of blue exhaust, and was gone. Very slowly, Kit stood up, pushed the antenna into his pants pocket, and stood in the street dusting his hands off on his shirt as he gazed in disappointment after the lotus. Nita sat herself back up again, shaking her head and brushing at herself. I thought maybe it was going to stay long enough to thank you, she said. Kit shook his head, evidently in annoyance at himself for having thought the same thing. Well, I don't know. I was thinking of what Pichu said. Don't be afraid to help. He shrugged. Doesn't really matter, I guess. It was hurting. Fixing it was the right thing to do. I hope so, Nita said. I'd hate to think the grateful creature might run off to, You know, and tell everybody about the people who helped it instead of hurting it. I have a feeling that doing good deeds sticks out more than usual around here. Kit nodded, looking uncomfortable. Maybe I should have left well enough alone. Don't be dumb. Let's get going, huh? Whatever the place is where the book's kept, it's pretty close. I feel nervous standing out here. They recrossed Madison and again started the weary progression from doorway to driveway to shadowed wall, heading north. At Madison in 52nd, Nita turned right and paused. It's on this block somewhere, she said, trying to keep even the thought quiet. The north side, I think. Fred, you feel anything? Fred held still for a moment, not even making a flicker. The darkness feels thicker up ahead at the middle of the block. Kit and Nita peered down the block. It doesn't look any different, Kit said, but you're the expert on light, Fred. Lead the way. With even greater care than usual, they picked their way down 52nd. This street was stores and office buildings again, all the store windows empty, all the windows dark. But here, though external appearances were no different, the feeling slowly began to grow that there was a reason for the grimy darkness of the windows. Something watched, something peered out those windows, using the darkness as a cloak, and no shadow was deep enough to hide in. The silent eyes would see. Nothing happened. Nothing stirred anywhere. No traffic was in sight, but the street felt more and more like a trap, laid open for some unsuspecting creature to walk into. Nita tried to swallow as they ducked from one hiding place to another, but her mouth was too dry. Kit was sweating. Fred's light was out. This is it, he said suddenly, his thoughts sounding unusually muted even for Fred. This is the middle of the darkness. This? Kit and Nita thought at the same time, in shock, and then simultaneously hushed themselves. Nita edged out to the sidewalk to get a better look at the place. She had to crane her neck. They were in front of a skyscraper, faced completely in black plate glass, an ominous, windowless monolith. Must be about 90 stories, Nita said. I don't see any lights. Why would you? Fred said. Whoever lives in this place doesn't seem fond of light at all. How shall we go in? Nita glanced back up the street. We passed a driveway that might go down to a delivery entrance. I'll talk to the lock, Kit said. Let's go. They went back the way they'd come and tiptoed down the driveway. It seemed meant for trucks to back into. A flight of steps at one side led up to a loading platform about 4 feet above the deepest part of the ramp. Climbing the stairs, Kit went to a door on the right and ran his hands over it as Nita and Fred came up behind. No lock, Kit said. It's controlled from inside. We can't get in? We're dead. We're not dead yet. There's a machine in there that makes the garage doors go up. That's all I need. Kit got out the antenna and held it against the door as he might have held a pencil he was about to write with. He closed his eyes. If I can just feel up through the metal and the wires. Find it. Nita and Fred kept still while Kit's eyes squeezed tighter and tighter shut in fierce concentration. Inside one garage door, something rattled, fell silent, rattled again, and began to grind. Little by little the door rose until there was an opening at the bottom of it 3 feet high. Kit opened his eyes but kept the antenna pressed against the metal. Go on in. Fred and Nita ducked through the darkness. Kit came swiftly after them. Behind him the door began to move slowly downward again, shutting with a thunderous clang.
Sorry.
Nita pulled out the Rowan wand so they could look around. There were wooden loading pallets stacked on the floor, but nothing else. Bare concrete walls, bare ceiling. Set in the back wall of the huge room was one normal-sized double door. Let's see if this one has a lock, Kit said as they went quietly up to it. He touched the right-hand knob carefully, whispered a word or two in the speech. Tried it. The right side of the double door opened. It wasn't even locked. Through the open door, much to everyone's surprise, light spilled. Oh, Callie's being a butt. Through the open door, much to everyone's surprise, light spilled. Plain old fluorescent office building light, but cheery as a sunny day after the gloom outdoors. On the other side of the door was a perfectly normal-looking corridor with beige walls and charcoal-colored doors and carpeting. The normality came as something of a shock. Fred, I thought you said it was darker here. Felt darker and colder. And it does, Fred said, shivering, his faint light rippling as he did so. We're very close to the source of the coldness. It's farther up, though. Up? Nita looked at Kit uneasily. If we're going to get the dark book and get out of here fast, we can't fool with stairs again. We'll have to use the elevator somehow. Kit glanced down at the antenna. I think I can manage an elevator if it gets difficult. Let's find out. They slipped through the door and went down the hall to their right, headed for a lobby at the far end. There they peered at a bank of elevators set in the same dark green marble as the rest of the lobby. No one was there. Kit walked to the elevators, punched the call button, and hurriedly motioned Nita and Fred to join him. Nita stayed where she was for a moment. Shouldn't we stay out of sight here? Come on! She went out to him, and Fred bobbed along beside. Kit watched the elevator, liked to see which one was coming down, and then slipped into a recess at the side. Nita took the hint and joined him. The elevator bell chimed. Doors slid open. The Peritons piled out in the middle of the middle elevator in a hurry, 5 of them together, not looking to left or right, and burst out the front doors into the street. Once outside, they began their awful chorus of howls and snarls, but Nita and Kit and Fred weren't sitting around to listen. They dove into the middle elevator, and Kit struck the control panel with the antenna hard. Close up and take off! The elevator doors closed, but then a rumbling, scraping, gear-grinding screech began. Low at first, then louder, a combination of every weird, unsettling noise Nita had ever heard an elevator make. Cables twanged and ratchets racketed, and had they been moving, she would have sworn they were about to go plunging down to crash in the cellar. Cut it out or I'll snap your cables myself when I'm through with you, Kit yelled in the speech. Almost immediately, the elevator jerked slightly and then started upward. Nita tried again to swallow and had no better luck than the last time. Those Peritons are going to pick up our scent right outside the door, Kit, and they'll track us inside and it won't be 5 minutes before... I know. Fred, how well can you feel the middle of the darkness? We're closer. Good. You'll have to tell me when to stop. The elevator went all the way up to the top, the 89th floor, before Fred said, This is it! Kit rapped the control panel one last time with his antenna. You stay where you are, he said. The elevator doors opened silently to reveal another normal-looking floor, this one more opulent than the floor downstairs. Here, the carpets were ivory white and thick.
I bet the elevator's like...
The wall opposite the elevators was one huge bookcase of polished wood filled with hundreds of books, like volumes of one huge set. Going left, they came to another hallway, stretching off to their left like a long stroke of an L. This one, too, was lined with bookcases. At the far end stood a huge polished desk with papers and dictaphone equipment and an intercom and a multi-phone line phone jumbled about on it. At the desk sat... It was hard to know what to call it. Kit and Nita, peering around the corner, were silent with confusion and fear. The thing sitting in a secretary's swivel chair and typing on an expensive electric typewriter was dark green and warty, and sat about 4 feet high in the chair. It had limbs with tentacles and claws, all knotted together under a big eggplant-shaped head and goggly, wicked eyes. All the limbs didn't seem to help the creature's typing much, for every few seconds it made a mistake and went grumbling and fumbling over the top of its messy desk for a bottle of correcting fluid. The creature's grumbling was of more interest than its typing. It used the speech, but haltingly, as if it didn't care much for the language, and indeed the smooth, stately rhythms of the wizard tongue suffered somewhat, coming out of that misshapen mouth. Kit leaned back against the wall. We've got to do something. Fred, are you sure it's up here? Absolutely. And past that door, behind that... Fred indicated the warty typist. From down the hall came another brief burst of typing, then more grumbling and scrabbling on the desk. We've got to get it away from there. Nita glanced at Fred. I shall create a diversion, Fred said with relish. I've been good at it so far. Great. Something big. Something alive, even, if you can manage it. Then again, forget that. Nita breathed out unhappily. I wouldn't leave anything alive here. Not even Joanne, Kit said with a small but evil grin. Not even her. This place has her outclassed. Fred, just... A voice spoke, sounding so loud that Kit and Nita stopped breathing, practically stopped thinking. Akthanath, it called, a male voice, sounding weary and hassled and bored. Come in here a moment. Nita glanced at Kit. They carefully peeked down the hall once more and saw the tentacled thing hunch itself up, drop to the floor behind the desk, and wobble its way into the inner office. Now, Fred said. No, save it. But come on, this is our best chance. Nita followed Kit down the hall to the door, crouched by it, and looked in. Past it was another room. They slipped into it and found themselves facing a partly open door that led to the office the typist had gone into. Through the slit, they could just see the tentacly creature's back and could hear the voice of the man talking to it. "Hold all my calls for the next hour or so until they get this thing cleared up. I don't want everybody's half-baked ideas of what's going on. Let Garm and his people handle it. And here, get Mike on the phone for me. I want to see if I can get something useful out of him." Nita looked around, trying not even to think loudly. The room they were in was lined with shelves and shelves of heavy, dark, leather-bound books with gold-stamped spines. Kit tiptoed to one bookshelf, pulled up a volume at random, and opened it. His face registered shock. He held out the book for Nita to look at. The print was the same as that in Carl's large advisory manual, line after line of the clear, graceful symbols of the speech. But whatever was being discussed on the page Nita looked at was so complicated she could only understand one word out of every 10 or 20. She glanced at Kit as he turned back to the front of the book and showed her the title page. Universes, Para-Universes, and Planes, Assembly and Maintenance, it said, a creator's manual. And underneath, in smaller letters, Volume 108, Natural and Supernatural Laws. Nita gulped. Beside her, Fred was dancing about in the air in great agitation. "What is it?" she asked him. "It's in here." "Where?" Kit said. "One of those. I can't tell which. It's so dark down that end of the room." Fred indicated a bookcase on the farthest wall. "It's worst over there." Nita stopped dead when she saw the room's second door, which gave on the inner office and was wide open. Kit got ready to scoot past the door. The man who sat at the desk in the elegant office had his back to it and was staring out the window into the dimness. His warty secretary handed him the phone, and he swiveled around in the high-backed chair to take it, showing himself in profile. Nita stared at him, confused, as he picked up the phone. A businessman, young, maybe 30, and very handsome. Red gold hair and a clean-lined face above a trim, dark three-piece suit. This was the Witherer? The kindler of wildfires? The one who decreed darkness? The star snuffer? "Hi, Michael," he said. He had a pleasant voice, warm and deep. "Oh, nothing much." "Never mind him," Kit said. "We've got to get that book." "We can't go past the door till he turns around." "The answer to that is pretty obvious, Mike. I can't do a bloody thing with this place unless I can get some more power for it. I can't afford streetlights. I can barely afford a little electricity, much less a star. The entropy rating..." The young man swiveled in his chair again, leaning back and looking out the window. Nita realized with a chill that he had a superb view of the downtown skyline, including the top of the Pan Am building, where even now wisps of smoke curled back against the lowering gray. She tapped Kit on the elbow, and together they slipped past the doorway to the bookshelf. "Fred, do you have even a little idea?" "Maybe one of those up there." He indicated a shelf just within reach. Kit and Nita started taking down one book after another, looking at them. Nita was shaking. She had no clear idea what they were looking for. "What if it's one of those up there out of reach? You'll stand on my shoulders. Kit, hurry!" "Michael, don't you think you could talk to the rest of them and get me just a little more energy?" "Well, they've never given me what I asked for, have they? All I wanted was my own universe where everything works. Which brings me to the reason for this call. Who's this new operative you turned loose in here?